welcome you to this. Is this okay? You can hear me okay? You may not be able to see me, but I want you to hear me. I want to welcome you to this year's Greenfield Memorial Lecture. And I want to thank you for coming. It's so great to see so many early childhood colleagues here in the room. And we have, we have such a rich diversity of groups represented here from the hospital, from early Head Start, from school district, all kinds of different wonderful agencies and commitments. And I think that's what I love about being here in Philadelphia, is the early Head Start community really connects and contributes so much. And so I hope that you'll be excited, as I know we are excited to hear our speakers today. This lecture series is a gift provided by the Greenfield Foundation. The series is held in honor the memory of a great man. This is a picture of a young, I'm informed, a young Albert M. Greenfield. And he's a great man and a great citizen of Philadelphia. We are fortunate to have with us the president of the Greenfield Foundation here with us, Priscilla Luce. And Priscilla, could you stand so we could thank you? Mr. Greenfield's deep commitments were to service, dignity, and civil liberties. These are very fitting ideals as we talk today about early childhood education. Our desire is to secure for all children a quality education. We want all of our children to experience success and to achieve their life goals. The No Child Left Behind Act and the Head Start Act have clearly placed early childhood in the center of this public square debate about young children. Early childhood education is really now both an issue of strong national interest and in some places areas of hot debate. As such, we feel there's a whirlwind of mandates, models, methods, oh my. Lots of lions, tigers, and bears out there. And these tensions and these debates, which are really good debates, but they're really, in some ways, they may reflect some our ignorance about the role of early childhood in our society, and they may also reflect some of our equivocal voices about the importance of robust early childhood education. So today, we are going to carefully consider the national context. What do we mean by success for all children? What are the essential components of quality early childhood education? Our keynote speaker is going to be Dr. Jerleann Daniel. And after Dr. Daniel talks, I'm going to introduce our panel. And then we'll have a time for, I know this group has lots of questions and lots to say. So we'll have a time for both formal and informal time to talk and share. But let me introduce our keynote speaker and get to the important events. Dr. Jerleann Daniels, we're privileged to have her here this afternoon to speak with us on challenges confronting early childhood education in the U.S. Dr. Daniels is the Executive Director of the National Association for the Education of Young Children, our nation's largest organization of early childhood professionals, and a leading voice on standards of quality, as NACE provides accreditation for early childhood programs nationally. Dr. Daniels came to NACE from the Academy, and particularly from the School of Education, which we're kind of proud. She was at the University of Pittsburgh School of Education, where she served as the chair of psychology and education. Prior to her time at Pitt, probably what informed a lot of her scholarship was being a director of a child care center for 18 years. Dr. Daniels' scholarly work has focused on transitions for infants, toddlers, and children with difficulties in childcare, and on African American child-rearing practices. Her experience and expertise have made her a much sought-after member of national boards and committees, of which she probably serves on 1 million of them, all of which providing her input on improving the well-being of young children. I have the good fortune to serve with Jerry on National Head Start advisory committees. And I must say I've learned a lot from Jerry. I greatly respect this national leader, and we bring her to this campus with great pride. Jerry has a keen analytic mind, a heart for service, and a strong and clear voice for children. Jerry really, I've been so impressed with watching her in meetings. She has a talent of cutting through the BS to get to the truth of the matter. And for her, truth always trumps politic. And that is really has been very, very impressive to me. So therefore, it's with great pleasure that I introduce this national leader. Jerry?
What a wonderful introduction. When you said truth trumps politics, I am reminded of my mother's, who is now deceased, her lifelong struggle to raise me right in her way of thinking and my dad's way of thinking, and honesty was always very important. But after they armed me with that, they were kind of embarrassed because, if you tell a child to be honest, sometimes it's kind of tough what comes out of their mouths. And so then she spent the rest of her life trying to help me to learn tact. And, I'll have to use John as, ask him to give me assessment around that to see whether I have learned that or not. But thank you for that very kind introduction. I almost want to say from one troublemaker to another. Well, I'd like to talk today about early childhood, us as a community of learners. We talk a lot about ourselves as a community of learners. And I want to layer onto that notion of community of learners some questions. And so my questions are, when will all children really mean all children in early childhood education? When does all really mean all? When will we act on what we know with consistency? It's almost like asking, when will our quest for ongoing quality improvement end? And it probably won't and shouldn't. But at the same time, I'd love to see us get closer to that non-ending point. Sometimes it feels like we're treading water, and I'd like our community to, as someone at lunch today said, to be bold thinkers, to take on challenges with gusto, and speak truth to power on behalf of all children, all of our children. When are we going to be able to eagerly consider a slightly different point of view? A point of view that came to fruition from a different starting point. Think about that. How many ideas do we embrace that start in a place we don't know and speak truths that don't feel but so comfortable to us? When will we embrace those and examine them in ways that are growthful for all of us and the work we do on behalf of children and families? Let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. Do you remember the National Governance Association several years ago when they looked into the hearts of the American people and they said, you know what we need? We need for every single child to go to school ready to learn. It was brilliant, actually. Do you know what we did, our community of learners in early childhood education? We had apoplexy. We had a fit. What do they mean? Children are born ready to learn. And we just huffed and puffed and fussed a great deal about that. And that's true. They are born ready to learn. But this was an idea that came from a different place, a different expertise, if you will. When we finally calmed down, we came to understand that you can't get to ready to learn at the schoolhouse door without coming through what we know about child development and developmentally appropriate practices and early learning, period, for very young children. But our first response as a community was to have a fit. We do that a lot. Someone says, you know, young children ought to have access to technology. There are people who are having a fit as we speak about that. It's so controversial in our field that in AYC we try to pick controversial topics that need clarification. They give advocates tools to work with. Do you believe that in 2011 we need a position statement on technology and young children? We do, because there are people who want no technology to come near any child, under 5 in particular. That's crazy. Technology is all around us. And so we would smash every tool as opposed to deal with the real issue. What's the content coming through the technology? And what do we have to add that would make that growthful for young children? How can we add what we know about how they learn to make those tools and the content coming through them useful and growthful for young children? So the Ready to Learn example is just one way that we're having a fit. And then, so the terminology school readiness came to be. And as we thought about that, well, what does that mean then that we ought to be doing, particularly in programs from birth to 5? Well, one of those essential components of early childhood education is a curriculum. It needs to be comprehensive. It needs to be challenging. It needs to be developmentally appropriate. That is, fit the needs and growth spurts, if you will, of children across the age ranges from birth to age 8. You need a curriculum. You need a hearty, substantive curriculum. Think of a curriculum as providing us with a roadmap to the kind of adults we'd like to see. Are the essentials there, the skill sets, the attitudes? Are there opportunities to take on challenges and uncover new ideas, try them on, manipulate them, and come up with their own theorems about them and test them out? A strong, hearty curriculum is essential to our work. As a community of learners, let's go back just 25 years when NAYC developed our system of accreditation of young children's program. The vast majority of early childhood education programs 25 years ago did not have a written curriculum that they were using. Not zip in terms of the curriculum. We were winging it. We were talking about child development, we talked about the importance of play, and some of us could be pretty articulate about that. But it was hard for anybody to follow in our footsteps without having a written curriculum. We've come a long way. There are numerous curricula on the market today. Not all of great quality, but they're there, and some choices can be made. Well, if you're going to have a curriculum, you need to be able to find out how you're doing. Are you meeting the goals? Are the children learning what you think they're supposed to be learning? And so now we're confronted with a word that we are really struggling with as a field, and that's the A word, assessment. as a field, we are struggling to understand, odd as it may sound, the need for it. And if we get past the need, then we're struggling with the how-tos of it. And what is it really for? Is it to form instruction? Is it to evaluate programs? We tend to keep thinking in either or. And it's for all of those things, but it has to be used appropriately. Well, let's go back to our questions. All children. If we skip over what we know to be factual about assessment, that is, assessment tools are validated on specific populations. Assessment tools have specific purposes. If we move all past that, elbow those facts out of the way, and just pick up whatever tool and decide, oh, I think I'll use this for screening, and it's not a screening tool. We have instances where governmental bodies have made some of those standing mistakes, requiring or suggesting tools that are inappropriate. So tools have to be used for what they're meant for. We skip past quite readily, we don't even blink when we don't pay attention to what populations a tool has been validated on. And while you might think that's a little thing, well, we're all Americans, right? Well, we are, but we also all come from different starting places in terms of our culture and in terms of our values. And it matters. Let me give you an example. Lift us outside of early childhood. I had an appointment with a relatively new doctor, and he wanted to change one of my medications. And I thought, well, okay, fine. He gave me good logic as to why. And I said, okay, so tell me about what you're about to prescribe. I said, any difference in terms of men and women, for example? He says, oh, no difference like that. I said, how about black and white people? He said, well, actually, this line of drugs doesn't work well, is known not to work well in African Americans. And I looked at him and I thought, I do this a lot. In my mind, I thought, I didn't hear him. And I said, I beg your pardon. And he said, well, this is known not to work well with African Americans. And I want to say, do you see? And I said to him, so why are you prescribing it? He said, well, the system, and this is something we do in early childhood, the system says we have to. And he says, well, the system says we got to try this line first. I said, could the system be wrong? He said, yeah, they're wrong. I said, why do I have to be the guinea pig? Why do young children, all young children, have to be the guinea pig when we skip past what we know to be true about some of our assessment tools? All right? Needless to say, that doctor got a piece of my mind, but I didn't change because I thought that this is an opportunity to make a champion of him. I'm still working on it. We'll see how that turns out. If I keel over, I wasn't successful. But I did get a different medication out of him. So the assessment area is one we're trying to understand. And clearly, if we're going to offer a solid, high-quality educational program for young children, the curriculum and the assessments need to be aligned. And aligned is such an innocent and yet loaded word. What does that mean, aligned? And I think, but for me, more importantly than the alignment, because I think we can get there eventually. We can get there. But for me, what matters most about the connection between curriculum and assessment and the alignment between the two is whether or not the critical adults understand the two elements and how they interact. Do teachers understand? do parents and families understand? Because if the critical adults engaged in the educational transaction don't understand the use of it, then it's not a good tool for them. Let me give you a teacher example. As a child care center director, I asked teachers to do anecdotal records. And my thought was that this would be their tool to kind of keep track of what was going on in their classroom, make adjustments to their teaching. And mind you, this was over 30 years ago. So the tools were not necessarily very sophisticated, and those that exist weren't necessarily available in a small community program. But we were doing the best we could, trying to look at our teaching, and particularly concerned about the social and emotional development of the children. And so periodically, a team of teachers would come to me and say, "Man, Jamal is just off the hook. We don't know what to do with him. He's driving us nuts. You gotta come and observe and help." So I went into the classroom and I sat down and I would watch. And of course, Jamal was perfectly fine while I was sitting in the room, right? I told the teachers I had a calming effect on him. That was a joke, But what really had happened was that I skipped something here. So before I went into the classroom, I asked them to show me their anecdotal records, which they gave me the envelope of the anecdotal records. But they were very hit and miss. There was no theme. You couldn't tell. It was as though each day somebody said, "Oh man, I haven't written anything on Jamal." And so they'd scribble something. You had no sense of what they really knew about the whole being of Jamal. If I asked them to orally tell me about Jamal, which I always did, after they'd hand me the record and I say, "Tell me who he is, tell me about him," they could give me the most comprehensive, thorough, whole child analysis of who Jamal was. I went to their records and there was no evidence of who Jamal was. It was a scattershot kind of thing. And clearly, the teachers did not see my required observational records as their tools. It was of no use to them. We've moved beyond that now. We've moved to a place where we have some tools and we're trying to figure out which ones to use and how. What's most useful for a teacher. Key to this for me is that the assessment and the connection to the curriculum be written in language that is user-friendly, so that when a teacher looks at the evidence, which is what an assessment is, looks at the evidence of a child's progress, she can make sense of it and then go back and relook at her teaching strategies, which feed into this connected curriculum and assessment, to figure out what she needs to do differently or how she can augment this learning environment for each and every child in her classroom. And I use her because that is the vast majority of early childhood teachers. And so that's one audience in our community of learners that really need to understand assessment. But then there's another set of adults, and that's the families. And I think it's that connection to family is what will help us answer that question of when will all really mean all. The approach that is going to be important that we use as early childhood educators is what is called a family-centered or strength-based approach. It's an approach that says that these other adults, these family adults, are partners with me in this educational endeavor. They have sources of evidence that I don't have access to. They know something really important about this child that I need to know to augment my teaching. And I, in turn, have something to share with them. Because in this group environment, things are a little different, and the expectations are precise if we're lucky, in terms of an early learning standards, and we have some sense of the growth and development of children and where their progress ought to be. So teachers and family members have something to share. An important part of what families have to share is the cultural nuance of that young child's growth and development, which is just as legitimate as the developmental progressions for math, for literacy, for science, and whatever it is the school's culture would have a child learn. Those roots of a child, the cultural and linguistic roots, those cultural nuances, if we could, as a field, find a place for bringing those nuances into our work in a real, authentic, two-way dialogue with families, I think we could take our work and make it soar. I think that's the point at which we would truly be a profession, when we can do that. You've heard people talk about difficult tasks and say, oh, it's not rocket science. I would say to you that our work is the real rocket science. Anytime you have to balance culture, academics, social emotional development, all the aspects of a whole child, that's the real rocket science. And all of us have to bring our A game to that endeavor. So we need the parents as substantive partners. We need to know that they have real data that they can share with us, real expertise that we need. And the communication has to be open and two-way. That is to say that we ask, we talk about when we teach young children using open-ended questions, and it's really hard to do. When we're dealing with adults, if you ask open-ended questions, that's how you get the data from families. If you say, for example, I can remember an example in some work we've done where a dad comes in, his daughter Jasmine was absent from school the day before, and the dad comes in and he says, the teacher says, oh, you weren't here yesterday, and he said no, and he got ready to say something else, and she said, well, we missed her, have a good day. He had so much to share. He was eager to share. He was about to share it. But the teacher said, have a good day, and turned about her business. Imagine if she had waited there and said, we missed Jasmine yesterday. What was happening? Then he has a chance to share. Well, we went to visit her grandmother. She had strawberries in the yard. She had, she came away with red strawberry juice all over, but we made the best strawberry pie. She could learn a great deal about that family's interaction. That could inform her practice. And indeed, when she does that, she might invite that dad to come tell us about growing up strawberries. And you made a pie? Tell us about that. The kids would love to know. What are the ingredients? What can I get? And that invitation to that other partner, that other part of our community of learners who starts at a different place and brings a different nuance, that's when we're really professionals, when we can weave that in. We talk about developmentally appropriate practice sometimes as if it is this solid, unmoving thing. It is indeed not. It is dynamic. It changes because the research tells us more. It is not because in the minds of DAP it says that the social cultural context is critically important. It says that we individualize. And if we take that to heart, that means our work is ever changing. That means how we apply what we know, let's stick with Jamal, what we know about Jamal, and how we work with him in the curriculum, the assessments we use, and our interactions with families, all of those things connected in our community of learners, that's how we achieve high quality for young children. That's how we do it. Another aspect of a family centered approach, a strength-based approach, is an aspect that says that the program and families share in the decision making. This is more than bringing the brownies, okay? This is talking about the curriculum, for example. Because I said to you, curriculum is like a roadmap for the kind of adults we're looking for, the kind of citizens we want. Parents, families have a voice in that. They have some ideas about what that should be. In Minnesota, when they did their early learning standards, one of the things one researcher did was to take those standards, and in Minnesota, they have a number of diverse communities. Most of us don't think that way, but they do. They have a number of diverse communities in and about Minneapolis and so forth. And so this researcher took those early learning standards. Now, mind you, the powers that be had struggled over them and nailed them down, and this was going to be it. She took them out to a couple of those diverse communities. And she said to them, the state has adopted this. Does this work for you? Horrors. Somebody asked a family, did it work for them? How did it connect to the vision they had for what they wanted for their children? And she got feedback from them. And they were able, in those focus groups, to talk about and articulate what they wanted for their children and how it might connect to those early learning standards, the specific aspects of it. When I heard about that, I thought, wow, it would have been wonderful to have a community, another part of the community, the teachers, circled around to hear and grow and learn. What a professional development opportunity. And that is another aspect of our work, a critical component, opportunities for professional development. And perhaps if we didn't often skip past that as well, the notion that we can just say, all right, here's the new way we're doing things, go for it, and hand somebody a book, as opposed to, let's work on this together, let's talk about it, give teachers a chance to make it their own, just as we give children a chance in free play, when we set up an environment of free play. We call it free play, but everything in there is calculated. And we know, because of the children who are in the room, we've set things up just for that group of children. And yeah, it's free, but it's intentional. And when children have a chance to explore, manipulate, they can make it their own. The same is true of teachers. They need an opportunity to have some autonomy about the work that they're doing, to bring their knowledge to because they've got important critical knowledge as well, bring it to this environment, bring it to these materials, make it their own, and make it work for their children. There are other members of our community that I don't want to miss. And let me close with two examples. I want to tell you about a parent who took it upon herself to pave the way for another set of parents. This was an African American parent who had seen her neighborhood change to become largely Latino. And she had had several children go through the Head Start program. And she knew what Head Start had done in terms of each of her children and for her life as well. She knew the confidence she felt having been part of the parent council and so forth. And so she was with her youngest child in this room and seeing the Spanish-speaking children come in the room and she felt, you know what? These children aren't getting the full breadth of what Head Start has to offer. Their parents aren't volunteering in the classroom. and no one else, no staff member spoke Spanish. This parent, this member of our proud community, took it upon herself to learn Spanish. Now, you can imagine the errors she must have made, when you didn't trill her R's or didn't do whatever. But what the Latino community knew was here was one of their neighbors who cared enough to try, who was earnest in her endeavors, and they taught her a word at a time, if you will. She learned enough to be able to communicate with those parents about the exciting things that were going on in that classroom, to make a way for them to come in to that classroom, to come into that Head Start community, to share in the decision making, to bring their cultural nuances to the work, to make it meaningful and whole for all of those children. Our timer is relentless here. All right. One more example, and that is another aspect of our community, the children. They are equals in our community of learners. We often talk about it's important that children realize that the teachers don't have all the answers, that they can have answers. And we talk about that a great deal. I think what we miss in the curriculum assessment connection, if you will, is that children who we want to have whole and meaningful lives, who we want to be able to interact playfully with materials and subject matter, when we have something like early learning standards and children know what's expected of them, that's how they begin to take charge of their own learning. When they're treated as equals in this community of learners. Nobody's doing to them. They are part of and responsible for their learning. Today I was in two classrooms. The teachers were Susan, Evelyn, Susan, and Wanda. All right. This time of year, do you know what's going on in those classrooms? The children have taken charge of their community. And what I mean by that is that they clearly had affinity for each other. They were comfortable. And the teachers were not having to police the room. They were doing what, an adult in that community would do. They were making materials available, they were working with small groups of children, but many children were working on their own and with each other. And when a little dispute erupted, and which they would, right? They figured it out. They handled it. They knew how to take charge of their self-regulatory learning, if you will. That's a fabulous thing to see. This really is my last example. When you become a grandmother, suddenly you almost don't know any other children existed. So it's even better than your own kids, frankly, because your own kids, you're just trying to get them together. Grandchildren, that's somebody else's job. Well, when my oldest granddaughter is about to turn 14, which I'm amazed at, but her kindergarten year of school, we were visiting them. They live in Michigan. We were visiting them, and a letter had come telling the family what materials were needed for kindergarten. And there were things like a change of clothes, and you know what's on that list, right? But then the list also said 5 formatted discs. And I looked at the list and I said, 5 formatted discs? What on earth for? And I consider myself to be open-minded, right? But I'm going, 5 formatted discs? But, so then we went to Target, and we were on our way into the store to buy these items, and my daughter, who always has thought that she was raising me, okay? She came here that way, turned to me before I crossed the threshold of the door, and she said, Mom, we're going in this store. We're going to buy everything on this list. If you think there's something she needs that's not on the list, feel free to buy it. If, however, you do not, when we leave this store, I don't want to hear another word out of you. I was like, well, excuse me. All right? So I stood there. I was frozen. The doors wouldn't close because I'm standing in the door. And I'm gritting my teeth, trying to decide, was I going to trust this kindergarten teacher? Well, finally, and this will tell you how long it took me to decide, I decided I would trust her. And I stepped across the threshold, just as they were coming out the store. You know, it was a struggle. And so, about October, I'm talking to Amani on the phone. I said, Amani, have you used those discs yet? She said, what disc, Grandma? I said, oh, okay. I'm going, all right, this is good, this is good. I mean, this is, because I have the apoplectic syndrome too. All right, I do. You know, I'm working on it. So then it came about, December. And I asked again about the disc, and she said, Grandma. Well, then came January, February or so, the parent-teacher conference, parent-teacher-child conference, led by, guess who? Amani led that conference. She knew what the standards were. She had had an opportunity with her teacher and her classmates to assess her work. All right? She had a PowerPoint display of her work. Nobody twisted her arm. Nobody made her feel uncomfortable. She had a PowerPoint display. And she proudly said to her parents, you will notice in September that my letters are all different sizes and the words run together. Next slide. You will now see that I have periods and question marks. She knew what the progression was. She was proud of the work that she had taken charge of and could tell her parents about. And you know where the parents were, right? Over the moon. Over the moon. That's a learning community that figured out how to put curriculum and assessment and professional development and put children in charge of their learning and connected with family who could be proud that here was a place that dealt with all children. Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry, so much. And I think this is the exciting part. This is what all of us in terms of the early childhood community, we know what the pieces are. How do we put them together so that we really move the ball for the children? So the million-dollar word in early childhood education is quality. So the question is, what constitutes quality? What constitutes this integration, this putting up together of the pieces to facilitate the child's internalizing that love for learning, not getting in the way of. Because lots of pieces you can trip over unless they're put together in a really, really good way. So one of the things that we've been working on, we have a panel that's going to share with us in a bit. For the last 10 years, we've been working on a dynamic partnership. Penn faculty at the School of Education and early childhood experts, early childhood educator experts, of which some of them are in this room, who are working with us to build and test a quality comprehensive program that struggled with these major components, to put these components together as a whole, because that's the only way they operate, as a well-running whole, but not as a series of parts. So what we did is we basically looked at these three important components that Jerry indicated to us that we need to be stimulated to think about. Purposeful assessment, integrated curricula and family engagement, dynamic professional development. And we basically developed and put together an integrated program that we call EPIC, evidence-based program for integrated curricula. And we tested it, and we basically developed some very strong evidence to support it. And this strong evidence is really, we're sharing with you as authors of how important it is for us to think about putting all these important pieces together and not having them struggle and be disconnected. So we have asked our panelists today, who are actually three national experts who really will draw our attention to some of these important features. And these colleagues I'm very proud and privileged to have an opportunity to work with them, because their expertise have been brought together to actually complement each other. So folks have been working together in a really, really tight collaboration with experienced educators and professionals. So what we want to do is I want to introduce them to you, and they're going to come up and share with you some of the lessons they've learned at each of these critical places about what are some of the important features that provide the key evidence for this kind of integration. So they're going to share with you. But let me just briefly introduce them to you, and then they'll come up and speak. Dr. Paul McDermott will focus on purposeful assessment. Paul is a professor at the Graduate School of Education, and he's a national expert psychometrician and multivariate statistician who specializes in the treatment of large population-level data in education. He has over 30 years of research experience with scores and scores of publications, including producing nationally standardized measures for young children's learning and their behavior problems. Paul has led EPIC's work on the development of innovative measures to assess skill development of Head Start children while they're still in Head Start. Next, after Paul, Vivian Gadsden will be focusing in on integrated curriculum and family engagement. Vivian is the William T. Carter Professor of Child Development and Education at Penn, and the director of the National Center on Fathers and Families. Vivian's research interests center on the cultural and social factors affecting learning and literacy across the lifespan, with a particular emphasis on engaging families and connecting with their rich cultural diversity. She provided leadership to the development of the integrated curriculum and our family engagement in EPIC, and she's going to share some of her insights. And finally, we have Dr. John Duplantis, who is the Executive Director of the Penn Center of Educational Leadership at GSE. John will focus on professional development. During his fruitful time at Penn GSE, he has greatly expanded programs on leadership nationally and internationally, focusing on these key management processes in education. One of John's major recent pieces, which connects with us, is work in the development of building distributed leadership in Philadelphia, a project that was a research project that was funded by the Annenberg Foundation. He will talk with us today about the place of distributed leadership in quality early childhood education. So we're going to start with Paul McDermott. Paul?
Hi, Jerleann. Ashley, are you on board? Oh, okay. Thank you very much for the kind words, John. Now I really do wish I invited my wife so she could hear them. My topic is assessment, so I guess that makes me the A man. And I'm going to focus very quickly on some points that were gleaned from the National Research Council about assessment of children in general, but especially young children. And particularly the fact that we really have to think out of the box, as Jerry is saying. And we're going to talk a little bit about Criterion-Referenced Assessment. And then the second issue is the necessity to have comprehensive coverage in assessment and have it centered properly. Again, one of Jerry's points. Reliability and validity, of course. We have to have assessment which is sensitive to growth. We can't wait until it's too late to find out whether the curricula actually kicked in or not. And then, again, point taken, we have to think of assessment that has multi-purpose, and it's good to have assessment that can be used for progress monitoring, but it has to be useful for program evaluation or summative assessment as well. And sometimes both can be accomplished at the same time. So next. What I'd like to do is just take you very quickly to an aspect of the instrument, which was one of the main instruments in the EPIC project that we developed. And of course, we found ourselves in a stead where we were going to be doing a multi-year project with Head Start children, and we needed to develop a curriculum. We had to gauge the curriculum. The problem being, of course, is that commercial instrumentation just would not work. Would not work for a number of reasons. There's nothing bad about those commercial instruments. They do what they're supposed to do, which is usually summative measurement, status measurement. But they're not really developed for measuring across periods of time, and clearly they are not centered on Head Start children. According to our government reports, as late as 2008, Head Start children operate typically around the 15th to the 20th percentile in most areas of functioning, unfortunately. And that really means we do not use instrumentation that's centered around the 50th percentile. Almost all the commercial instrumentation is so centered. There's where the items are developed, that's what the tests are all about, and the items that are left over are the ones that are appropriate for Head Start children that simply will not do. The best instrument available, for instance, for measuring mathematics with very young children, Head Start age, commercial instrument, between the beginning of the year and the end of the year. In the best case, you get about a 4 or 5 item change. You simply cannot measure growth that way. That could be error easily. Let alone an instrument that would be sensitive enough to pick up growth or find gradients of time. So we began with, again, there is point having us begin with standards. And a Criterion-Referenced test, of course, what it does is it says, well, norm reference tests are very good, but what they do is they find out the distribution of what exists currently, which is not entirely relevant to special populations. And what we really need is to have begin with standards. So the 6th column here is talking about the Head Start indicators, national indicators. And what we did in the first column is just for this example, these are just random items. We picked half a dozen the mathematics scale of the Learning Express, which is the instrument. And you can see these items are becoming progressively more difficult. So these are items in mathematics running from about a point where about 70% of the children can master them in general to a point where just under 60%. So becoming more difficult. And you see in the early columns what the items are in the Learning Express, and then, and of course, as I said, the 6th column, you see the national indicators, and the Learning Express was built around these criteria, hence Criterion-Referenced. Also, because we're in Pennsylvania, we paid attention to the very useful Pennsylvania early childhood indicators, and that's the 5th column. And what the rest of that is, off to the right side, is in alignment with the major instruments that are being used in Head Start and across the nation for measuring the same mathematics skills. Galileo, and notice there's a lot of empty spaces there telling you that those skills are not being measured. Galileo, core, empty. And we see, for instance, the NRS, we know what happened to it. And finally, we see the TIMA. It's a superb test for its purpose, but it has holes in terms of measuring fine gradients of skills. So the next slide gives us a little picture of why the Learning Express was so comprehensive. It was deliberately built to cover all of those skills in the Head Start indicators and not just some of them that were easier to do. And so, for instance, you see 2 columns here, one which is just talking about the alphabet skills that are actually measured. These are not the items, these are skills, and there's many items that will be tapping these skills. The last presentations for vocabulary looks like fewer things, but of course it's different ways of assessing both receptive and expressive vocabulary across a great range of difficulty. And the next shows you in language skills here called listening comprehension, different kinds of sub-skills that are being measured, and the very last is mathematics. And it's with a great range of sub-skills built in. Of course, they have to be built in a way where we're in a hierarchy of difficulty, so that the first items that children encounter are relatively easy to master. So So the next issue then is centering the instrument around the children who are in Head Start. And of course, to do that, we have to build all those items that don't exist in the commercial tests. And we built a test which is specific to Head Start. It could be done for non-Head Start. It could be done for daycare centers. That's easy enough. It's just happened to be this study was about Head Start, and the point is you have to have the purposeful assessment for what we're doing. One of our goals, of course, was to measure growth. And so what this is showing is from one perspective across 1 year, and this would be in vocabulary at just 4 points in time. So we made a test that could actually be used multiple points in time, and this was used actually every 2 months. Very quickly, it only takes a short period of time to administer. And it's showing you individual growth curves of children. These are random children. And there's 2 curricula involved here. One which we'll call for the moment the blue curriculum, and the other one is the red curriculum. The facts as to what will come out in an article in American Educational Research Journal. I think it's to be coming out. And so here there's some preference you can see for the blue curriculum. Those kids are, but the red curriculum actually is a wonderful curriculum. Actually, is the best known curriculum in this particular area at the time. And then the next slide shows you what the growth curves can be used across these short periods of time to distinguish classrooms in Head Start. And here we have the blue classrooms and the red classrooms. And there's one red classroom that's doing exceptionally well, though. And so also the blue ilk would like to know what that teacher is doing. But these are the kind of questions you can be inspired to ask if you actually know something about what's actually going on, which is the purpose of these kind of measurements. And then the next slide shows some experimental outcome, and here we're looking at the blue curriculum and the red curriculum up against one another in a trial year, in a randomized control trial. And you can see there's some clear advantage to the blue curriculum, and it takes off in this trajectory. It's like this, it's called a cubic trajectory. It accelerates, with excitement, and then plateaus just a little bit, and then it accelerates again, and the red curriculum has a upward trajectory, and then probably runs into some kind of ceiling at the tail end, and not clear why. We can find out. It probably has something to do with the nature of the content and interference with other kind of content and so on. The next slide shows you a peek at what happens at just 2 particular time points using the Learning Express. This would be, I'm not sure, is this mathematics, I think, is it? It doesn't really matter, but the point is you can see the children, the distribution of the children's skills at 2 different time points, and this would be wave 2 and 3, so it would be January and March of the year. And you can see how the distribution has shifted noticeably just in those 60 days. And we would fit all 4 of them up if there was more room, and you could just see it's like a kinetic chart. You just see the kids moving across the year. It also shows us the modal leaders at the time points, the kids who were most prototypic of the classrooms at each time point, and that tells us something. And these are the kind of things you learn if you're able to have short interval measurements, which the commercial test to now allow. On the next, we said one of our purposes is to be able to do progress monitoring, of course, and that was what we were doing, but also we wanted to be able to take a look at being able to inform the curriculum, the development of the curriculum. And so what we did here was, this is an area of mathematics. And so this represents all of the items in mathematics. And you see on the left-hand side, the scale there is telling you the proportion, the percentage of children who have mastered the skill at a particular time point. So this time point is around January in the year. And we're seeing that in January, all these items on my side have been essentially mastered, and that's why the bars are so high. The ones on the right side, items not encountered in the classroom at large yet, and not many children have mastered them, of course. But in the center is the key, because that is what's prototypic of the program at this point, or the classroom, depending on how you calibrate it. And right in between at the midline of the red and the blue, that's the 50th percentile of the program at this time point. So it's the most representative point, and it's where most of the children are operating in the classroom. That's good information to have at this time in January. We can see that the kids in the red, just short of the midline, those are the kinds of skills that children have just mastered, and they need to be reviewed. The skills need to be continually reviewed in subsequent curricula. And then the blue items which are just to the right side. Those are the items that are being encountered next, and so they'll be newly introduced and so on. This helps us level the curriculum. So the next slide slips to an example in vocabulary, actually in alphabet skills, and it shows you how then we've sequenced out the curriculum as a result of this information as it stands in January. And this is how we did it with the EPIC. And so we have these different levels, and level 3, of course, is the focal level where most of the energy is in the classroom at this point. It's just to the right side of the midline. That's where most of the new skills are being picked up, and it still allows review of old skills. And it's this kind of sequencing we use to help develop the curriculum. And the next slide brings us to a last point I want to make, and it has to do with the practicality of all of this. I said these assessments were done with facility. They actually were done in 20 to 25 minutes. And you have to think about that because the instruments, commercial instruments, the best ones, the ones we'd be inclined to use otherwise, that are built to measure what the Learning Express measures in this 20-25 minutes. If we were to administer all 4 of those instruments, it would take us so long we would have to break it into 2 sessions, 2 different days, because the children really couldn't handle it. So the second point is emphasizing that we have to also be apprised of the fact that the repetitious measurement can have effects. And so what we did is, using item response theory and other sort of assets, we were able to make multiple forms of the Learning Express. So there's A form, B form, and so on. And we alternate these so that children are not encountering the same items, and yet we have everything on the same scale, so we can measure across time. We could make a C form and D form if we inclined to. Actually, we did this across a couple of years. And the last point is a very important issue that's becoming more apparent. And that is, in all these measures, whether we're doing it vis-a-vis the Learning Express, or we're doing it in commercial instrumentation, or we're doing it with authentic assessment, we have to think in terms of what kind of information we're getting. And what we've discovered in the last couple of years through empirical analysis is that we can isolate the proportions of stuff that the test scores are picking up that has anything to do at all with individual differences in children. And as it turns out, tests always pick up a piece of information which is not about the children's individual differences themselves, it's about the assessors who do the assessing, whether it's external assessors who come in the classrooms or whether it's the teachers themselves. You may be shocked to find out that instrumentation like core and dibbles and so on, typically about a quarter to 1/3 of what the scores are picking up has nothing to do with children's individual differences at all. It's the teachers. God loves them, but it's picking up teacher differences, which is a bit scary when we're using these instruments to measure change, because that tells you that the odds are that much of the change we're seeing is not necessarily the kids. Instruments like the Learning Express, because of the way people are trained to use it, like many of the commercial instruments, at most maybe about 2, 3, and the very most maybe about 5% of the variance has anything to do with the assessors. The rest is all about the kids themselves. There's an article coming out in Early Childhood Research Quarterly, and the title is written by my colleagues, John Fantuzzo and Vivian and one of my students, and Claire Waterman and myself, and the title is something about whose score is it anyway? And the subtitle is The Matter of Assessment Variance. So it's a very important issue when we start thinking about choosing assessment devices and shifting over to authentic assessments, which are based largely on teachers and their labor. And so the last screen summarizes what I was getting to, and it is the import of criterion-referenced testing, the matter of the comprehensiveness of the test and how important it is to have items that represent the full scope of what we're trying to get at. The standards, that's why standards are developed, that's why we do it, not just to print something on a piece of paper and reliability and validity, of course, and it has to be specific to the population we're talking about. Growth sensitivity is something very specific to instrumentation like the Learning Express, and if that's what you're looking for, if you want to do progress monitoring, then you're going to have to be very sensitive to growth, or if you're going to develop curriculum. And then the issues about assessor variance and minimalizing assessor variance and the other practicalities that we have to attend to. So thank you very much, and I'm happy to be gay now.
With the fear that I'm going to use up a few of my seconds, I want to thank John and also say that there are 3 dimensions of my being honored. We're honored to have Jerry here today and to have given such a provocative talk. Honored to have been able to work with John and Paul and the research team, the EPIC research team, and also the third is to have been honored to work with the teachers and teacher assistants and families and children in the school district of Philadelphia's Head Start. So thank you very much. So at the heart of what we were trying to do with EPIC and in response to the issues that Jerry raised was to really think about an integrated curriculum and family engagement. We, as you have suggested, Jerry, see this not simply the importance, but really the salience of families to what we do, and the reciprocal relationship between teachers and families. Actually, I still need that one. Okay. So there are 3 dimensions. One is responding to the whole child and supporting children's learning across critical dimensions of literacy, math, and social and emotional development. The use of multiple methods, and as I said before, a focus on family engagement. Thanks. And then the next slide, which I just have here because I think it's a cool slide, to be perfectly honest. We have a sense of the complexity of these multiple pieces, the many important pieces, and these pieces could be literacy, math, social and emotional development, families, teachers, communities, but they're following the same composition. We seek a certain kind of harmony that may often emphasize some pieces and at other times emphasize other pieces. But at the end of the day, our goal is to create a whole, to contribute to something that's greater than the parts, to consider the interconnectivity of these multiple dimensions. Next. So we are committed to an integrated curriculum that offers support for the whole child. As I said before, strategic integration across dimensions of children's early learning, having integration that is intentional of the multiple methods to achieve successful early childhood pedagogy and practice, and to have substantive participation of families working in concert with educators to support learning. And then the next slide, we have a sense of how those dimensions have been enacted in EPIC. With our literacy skills, we have these 5 levels, and we work to create levels that will allow children to progress. We are focused broadly on oral language, listening comprehension, and Paul's presentation spoke of the ways in which we have attempted to assess these. Vocabulary, alphabet knowledge, print concepts, and phonological awareness. And these really capture the vital areas that have been highlighted in research and that are at the heart of what practitioners are doing every day. And we try to align these to think about the ways in which those literacy skills are mapped onto mathematics skills. Skills such as counting and sorting and cardinality. And these being aligned with approaches to learning and the development of children's social emotional skills. How kids are ready, part of being ready for school is being ready around these cognitive skills, but it's also a readiness in their social emotional development. And so we are heartily focused on frustration tolerance, attention control, group learning, and task approach. And our best example, I'm going to do this with knowing that I may lose a minute, is one of the head of the Parent Policy Council giving us an example of her son who, when asked to do something, had taken this idea of frustration tolerance to a very good place and just told his mother, if you could wait just 1 minute, Mom, I'm just a little frustrated. And the idea that he could internalize that and make sense of it wasn't simply that he got it in one moment in time, but that he knew when to apply it and how to negotiate that. So give me the next slide. To put that, so we can have all these, multifaceted dimensions of children's learning, but how do we pull that together in an integrative way to make sense of it? And so with our various units, we focus the scope and sequence to understand something about the depth of learning, but also the ways in which learning is achieved through a sequence. We have been able to achieve this through a variety of methods: large group, small group, interactive reading, environmental change and home connections, which we will discuss a little bit more in the next slide, or at least give you an image. We wanted to build through an integrated curriculum the capacity to identify children's individual differences and to use that knowledge as a guide to create intentional child-centered instruction. And so here you have an image of the ways in which teachers are engaging children based on their individual differences and our effort to respond to those individual differences. Through multiple methods, which are reflected in the next slide, I think, okay. Multiple methods that create multiple classroom learning opportunities. These are the EPIC building blocks. So you get a sense of large group time and small group time, time for creative and dramatic play, time for home connections. Children have to eat during the day. So teachers are trying to negotiate all of these expectations in the course of the day, and at the same time, trying to engage children in a very active learning. Next one. And I'm going to skip this one just so I can. We spoke very briefly about interactive learning, where that really relies on and promotes a very deep love of reading. Tries to reinforce the literacy skills and concepts of print. Now here, children are reading storybooks, asking questions to support skill development. Each unit of the curriculum contains key books chosen for their ability to support targeted skills and expand, connect, and enhance concept development. And we have one of our lovely EPIC teachers demonstrating that. So for the next slide. Even in my classes here at Penn, we use a combination of large group and small group. And because it offers the opportunity through large group discussions to foster a sense of belonging, a belonging as part of the larger context of the classroom. Children are introduced to ideas and engage in activities to apply concepts in practice. So this group context supports listening comprehension, language skills, and cooperative learning with all the peers and all the adults in the classroom. And through small group instruction, they get an opportunity, the children get an opportunity to engage in more targeted work. These small group activities provide opportunities for teachers to introduce and have children practice skills to support a more nuanced and targeted or focused observation of children that attends to their individual levels, their individual styles, the kind of thing that Jerry talked about in her talk. Now, what we have deemed the third teacher is environmental change, and it's often a thing that is not, it's beyond having a pretty bulletin board. It's really an opportunity to use the context in a very strategic way to create special stations, bulletin board displays, and innovative props and visual cues to reinforce the very skills and abilities that are a part of the, that have been a part of the large and small group discussions up until that time. None of this really makes any difference to some degree unless we can really key in and hone in on the role of the family. We really would not have the children in the classroom if they were not in families. John mentioned that I direct a research center on fathers and families, and very often the discussion takes place around children and families and with fathers, as though men would be fathers without children. In much the same way, we really need to focus in on the families. So these home connections are carefully written activities that are intended to extend the learning from the classroom into the home and to create a reciprocal and thoughtful relationship between home and school. So over the course of an entire year, about 750 families completed an average of about 75% of the home connections. And that meant that there were about 13,000 successful exchanges where teachers were relying on the parents and parents were relying on the teachers. Teachers had an opportunity to engage in a more ethnographic, cultural study of their own classrooms, to move beyond the obvious of parents wanting to know something about their children's success in the classroom, but really being a part of the experiences in which their children were engaged. So these weekly home learning activities parallel classroom learning. They included both oral and written communications about children's learning. And the family work was displayed. And one example of this is in the next slide, where we have this family tree. Now there were several other examples, but this is one example where, and we might assume that families talk about this, but I don't know how many of you are deeply aware of your own family tree. But if you're like my friends and other people, we really don't know that much. And this is a wonderful exercise to get kids to both understand something about the coherence of families and the ways in which things build intergenerationally, but also to share some information about their families. There are several fundamental questions to address, though, because it's not simply about having fun with families. It's how to identify home educators. Who are the people with whom teachers need to work? How do we communicate information about assessments in a way that's non-threatening but engaging to parents and families? How do we prepare home activities that really build on the cultural capital and the cultural experiences of families? And how do we celebrate the work of home educators? The assumption can't be that parenting, and of course, parenting in and of itself is a wonderful experience. But if we could enhance that through some meaningful work that parents, in which parents can be in the classroom, we ultimately enhance their comfort and the ways in which they can contribute positively to their children's lives. And so we come back to the idea and purposes of an integrated curriculum and family engagement. We are committed and we embrace the idea of supporting the whole child through strategic integration across dimensions of children's early learning. We fully recognize the importance of intentionally integrating those multiple methods that speak to the child in front of us, not the child that we might imagine. And engaging in substantive participation of families, not as casual observers, not as hit or miss participants, but as integrally involved in the learning of their children and in the planful engagement of a trajectory for their children and for their role as families to ensure their children's well-being. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, John. It's really an honor to be here. I bring a different lens to this work. I haven't been involved in the development of EPIC or the kids database that preceded it, but I have long been an admirer of the work, and for at least 5 years, John and I have met on and off talking about the flow back and forth between the work that we were beginning in distributed leadership, which I'll tell you just a little bit about, and I'll be flowing in and out of that because we shared commonalities. We believed in teams, we believed in professional learning communities, we believed in robust training for teachers, we believed in the ability of teachers to do incredible things in schools, and by God, they did it, and they did it for John, and they did it in our distributed leadership work. The slide that's up there, it's a slide that's often used by, it was first used about 6 years ago by Ann Delahan, who is a consultant that does a training on professional learning communities. It comes from the work of Denny Berry, who was a superintendent. I was a superintendent for 17 years, so that lens enters into this, who was a superintendent in Virginia and did a dissertation on great schools. And you'll notice that this was at about the same time that I was proposing to the Annenberg Foundation to do this work in distributed leadership. And to my great joy, Annenberg funded that, generously funded that at $4.9 million, a 5-year project. And to add to it, we had a guide at our side in Gail Vinn, who's in the room here. And I must tell you that we learned as much from Gail as I think we've taught in the project. Denny Berry, the last line is that leadership is distributed, but the preceding lines really constituted components that we built into the work. And modules exist on all of these, ways in which we tried to bring these to every school that we were in. The work was enough successful that we are doing a follow-up of multi-million-dollar project in the Archdiocese of Philadelphia. So the interesting thing about distributed leadership is that back in 2000, CPRI, Penn's own research arm, and the work of John Sapovitz had found in their study of school reform that they held one thing in common, is that they all implicitly distributed leadership in the successful places. So distributed leadership had a life even before Jim Spillane work, which informed our work. I'm going to go to one other slide, and then I'm going to come back to the slide that precedes it. So there are about 4 principles that I'm going to speak to, and I've kind of written notes so that I can do this quickly and stay on track. And I'm going to come back to each one of them, but I'm not going to put this slide back up, so you'll have to remember them, or I'll mention them on the front end. So the first one is effective leadership supports evidence-based purposeful programming. The first principle reinforces the fact that really effective leadership focuses on evidence-based, smart, purposeful programm't that impacts learning. In Mike Schmoker's new book, Focus, it's a book that you get if you're part of ASCD, so it would be a popular book. It's Focus, Elevating the Essentials to Radically Improve Student Learning. He cites Jim Collins' book, Good to Great, and says that one of the things that Collins underpins Collins' belief is that the essence of profound insight into organizational improvement is simplicity. Well, Schmoker goes on to identify 3 elements that we should approach with simplicity and diligence until they're satisfactorily understood and implemented in every area that we deal with in schools. Now, it also happens to coincide with what Dr. Daniel had suggested would be wonderful if we would do, and we'll finally act on what we know works consistently. He says we should be doing 3 things. We should be dealing with what we teach, the coherent curriculum. We should be dealing with how we teach, the structurally sound lesson. And we should be embedding an authentic literacy, reading, writing, speaking, and listening into every classroom experience. Now he goes on to tell us what we know, and then at the end of the book he says, now let's just do it. The last chapter is about a paragraph long. And it really is an effort to take a position that if we implement what we know, it will benefit immeasurably what teachers do in terms of work. And when they work in teams and professional learning communities where curriculum and lessons are continuously developed, tested, and refined on the basis of assessment results, the four elements sounds very much like what John Fantuzzo and his team has built into EPIC. What we'll get is greater consistency in results in children's learning. And we should do it because it's time to do it. We get carried away with fads, and he pushes us back to supporting evidence-based, purposeful programming. EPIC is an example of that. Provides a powerful curriculum, instructional simplicity based on best practices that is integrated and works. Randomized trials have shown that, and had we had that work in Philadelphia, we went into Philadelphia schools where our curriculum was in place, an old curriculum, where instruction was promised, an instructional plan was promised every year of the grant but never delivered, and where assessment was loosely connected and certainly not formative in the way that it was delivered. So we had teams that were trained in leadership, 77 hours of training, trained in leadership without the tools in the classroom to give them the intelligence, this is John Fantuzzo's language, to give them the intelligence to be able to do the right things for children. And we would have crawled to be able to have had the kids database or EPIC as a program to draw on. Clearly, EPIC represents smart, data-driven outcomes and the curriculum, instruction, and formative assessments to provide a powerful impact on the learning of children in each classroom. I'm sorry. Okay, excuse me. Okay, thank you. So there are several other issues here that I'd like to move to, and I'm going to move to the second generalization and principle. That is, developing leadership capacity requires cultivating the expertise of individual teachers and sustaining results in program effects. Building leadership capacity sustains program effects and efforts, and there are some clear reasons for this. In the training of our distributed leadership teams, we said we invested 77 hours of the best leadership training based on Jim Spallan's work. He studied in Chicago distributed leadership, and I spent 2 days with him discussing what teachers needed to know and be able to do if we were going to train them. We built the modules around that. We used the best of consultants that we knew, and we used the best of Penn. We had wonderful programs that were in place that were training and many of the same things, and we used the people to build the modules of training that constituted this plan. Annenberg and Gail Levin supported our building this high-quality professional development with teachers, principals, and coaches. And what we found out was that as leadership evolves, as you train people in the things they need to know and be able to do, their locus of control changes. It goes from some other place to them. And they become well-trained and well-developed, teacher leaders. Secondly, the effect that this has on teacher leaders is that their efficacy grows in this was a statistically significant finding, so I can stay in statistically significant ways, in all of the efforts that they make to exact improvements in schools. And these same things are happening in parallel fashion in John's work in EPIC. Teachers come to believe that they can do it if they try, and in fact, they do it. Efficacy, as you well know, is one of the primary predictors of when a teacher will leave the teaching profession. If they don't believe they can do it if they try, they give up teaching. It's a very powerful effect. We find in our program that teachers make a deeper commitment to leadership as a result of efficacy, and we had proof in that more than half of our teacher leaders went on to get either further education in leadership, or they went on to get certification as principals, which was stunning to us. We didn't want that, we didn't seek that, but it was the result of their actually getting to believe so powerfully in what they did that they wanted to make a greater difference. Finally, what happens when leadership capacity and instructional focus increases is that building capacity increases, and more people are doing the work that makes the greatest difference. More staff are impacting the number one predictor of student achievement, which is instruction and the improvement of instruction. Okay. The third principle is leadership teams are learning communities that enhance collaboration within early childhood program. And I want to be sure that I'm on the right slide. Okay, there are two slides here. Leadership teams build collaboration, professional inquiry, and learning communities. The teams become collections of leaders whose job it is to create more leaders. We explain that in the very first training. We tell them that your job as a teacher leader is to go out and find more leaders and to help create more leaders in your building, because a school full of leaders is a good thing. The teams then go out with the help of leadership coaches, and we do coach them, because if you train people in things that don't coach them, you may not get the desired effects. Richard Hackman, who writes about teaming, says you must train teams because they won't deliver what you hope they'll deliver without it. And Gail Levin believed, because she sent me to Boston 3 times to observe the leadership coaches in the Annenberg Foundation created, that if we created coaches, that would support the work in the buildings. Boston had leadership coaches for a year, but we adopted that plan, and in fact, we trained the leadership coaches and the principals with the teacher leaders so that they were all operating on the same in the same way. So the teams became models for how teams can function in a school setting. But they also became mini learning communities themselves, and more committed to helping learning communities to move into place effectively. And you can see by the nature of the learning communities created by EPIC that they were everywhere, and powerful because they were everywhere. Professional learning communities require each individual to be a leader, setting high expectations for students and working collaboratively to ensure each student's success. Dr. Daniel also spoke about bringing people into decision making. One of the modules that we train, and we believe it's a stage of evolution to become a distributed team, is that they learn when and how to involve people in decisions. We teach them how to do that. And that can extend, they do that with each other, they do that with parents. That work extends across the school community. Wallace found, the Wallace Foundation found in one of their recent reports, which I'll mention later, that teachers in high-performing schools are more likely than others to see gains in student learning as the contributions of teams of teachers and of participation by parents and students exist. Professional learning communities are important because they target critical building needs, the needs that really would impact the learning of children. Schmoker celebrates Adlai Stevenson High School in Illinois for stunning success with professional learning communities because they focused on two things. They directed teams of teachers to create and help each other implement a quality common curriculum for every course. This was the first foundational step, again, not unlike EPIC. And directing the teams to ensure sound, ever-improving instruction and lessons. To ensure implementation, leaders, including teacher leaders and department heads, met with teams each quarter to discuss progress on quarterly assessments, which had a very powerful literacy component. They stayed focused on these things for 5 years, resisting any temptation to add or adapt new programs, and they became routinely recognized and celebrated for measurable success and progress that they made in their school. It's become a model school. Schmoker calls this the essence of leadership. We believe that EPIC has brought this measurable success and progress to early childhood programming and schools in Philadelphia, and would be even stronger if the DL component piece was included. The final principle is that distributed leadership builds a culture of success based on student achievement and the efficacy of educators. When you target student achievement, build instructional leadership, and enhance teacher efficacy, you build culture. We found as a result of our randomized trial that we use to look at leadership work in Philadelphia schools, that culture changed. We found again, statistically significant changes in the culture of the schools that were DL schools as opposed to the controlled schools that were not. Trust and collegiality developed, and these are all elements of that. Trust and collegiality developed across the school community as a result of the work of leadership teams. Teams working with the faculty built the school capacity to address curricular and instructional issues and to be confident that they could address those issues. They didn't have all of the tools to address those issues. Ultimately, a culture of success was cultivated across teachers, students, and parents in targets that they were able to hit. They chose other targets because they couldn't target the very big, important pieces that you've heard about with EPIC. The Wallace report, this is the report I was going to mention earlier, Connecting Leadership to Learning, found that teachers of high-performing schools stress the importance of school culture that encourages professional community, an environment in which teachers help and guide one another in a school-wide collaboration to improve classroom pedagogy. Principals and teachers agree that 3 leadership practices in particular contribute to that better instruction. Focusing the school on goals and expectations for student achievement, things that our other speakers have spoken to. Attending to the teacher's professional development needs. I did a paper at ARA, and the president of ARA said the biggest problem we have in America is that we don't allocate money for the professional development of teachers. And third, creating structures and opportunities for teacher collaboration, which is at the heart of what John built in EPIC and what we built in the DL project. We believe that by bringing distributed leadership and EPIC together, we will create an even better learning system in the schools, and I mean learning system, and greater success for Philadelphia's children. Recall that I mentioned instructional improvement is the #1 predictor of student achievement. Number 2 is leadership. Number 1 is represented in the program structure, the curriculum, the instruction, the assessments that EPIC has built and proven. Number 2 is a strong distributed leadership structure to go with it. We think that together they would represent a powerful combination for the future, and so we are talking about that. Thank you.
We'll have a little bit of time for questions, and so I'd like to ask our panelists and speakers Jerry and panel, could you guys come to the front here, and we'll have some questions from the floor. We have a microphone. We have someone who can help us. We'll just have a brief period of formal questions, and then we'll have some informal time to be together. You guys want to sit here? Okay, so anyone has any questions that they would like to ask our panel? We have okay. Both in terms of, or panels, in terms of questions to ask each other. The focus again for us in terms of our understanding of what's necessary for us to bring quality education to all our children, and how comprehensive these different pieces are, and how we have to work to actually put these pieces together, because they can't operate in isolation. So any thoughts or questions or comments that you would like to make?
I have a question about distributed leadership. If you have a school that has not yet done this, but would be willing to do it, how would one begin?
That's a very, it's a long answer to a very succinct question. Let me do this. At ARA, I presented a paper about the design and implementation of distributed leadership, and I laid down all of that out. So I will make sure you get a copy of it is the fast answer to the question. The longer answer is that really you could design that plan around something other than the very extensive program that we created. In fact, I did some training with some early childhood leaders with the United Way, and they've taken the principles and gone out, and they've told me that they've started to see some success from that very small amount of training alone. So I think you could do anything from something simple to something very complex. I'll give you the complex and let you, I'll help you. I'll help you design something that fits your setting and your needs, and I'm happy to do that.
Any other questions, comments?
You know, I was at a conference in New York several weeks ago, put on by the AFT, the NEA, the U.S. Department of Education. I think it was those three, which is kind of phenomenal in and of itself. But it was an international conference with people from the Netherlands, Brazil, just a wide variety of people. And someone had looked at what made for success across all of these countries around teacher preparation and their success once they got into the classroom. And there was a lot had to do with the status that the country in which the country held teachers. But one of the things they kept coming back to was that teachers grew in their professionalism, grew in their expertise, grew in their commitment to the field when they had some autonomy and when they had opportunities to participate in leadership. And they wanted professional development. They would do it on their own if somebody wouldn't pay for it. They found ways to do professional development. And so there's a thirst out there among teachers who want to take control of their professional lives so that they can be the best they can be for children.
Just an anecdote. It took us 8 to 9 months to negotiate an agreement with the Federation of Teachers. When we finished the project in Philadelphia, they modeled a project that they designed themselves and got funded after the project. And the pieces that you mentioned are all critical pieces. The autonomy, the quality professional development, and the opportunity for them to exert leadership in something that matters to them is very powerful. And all of the bashing of teachers really bothers me because we had such wonderful teachers that we would lay on Market Street and be run over for any of them. They were so powerful and so hardworking in what they did and how hard they worked on this work.
Hi. I have a question about several speakers have discussed the importance of family and incorporating family into part of the partnership to improve practice. This is probably not an original question, but what do you do when there's families that are not willing to be partners or do not seem to think that is of importance, or even are overwhelmed with other needs in their lives that they're not able to secure?
There are. It's not a small issue. And certainly, when we were doing EPIC in the very first year of EPIC, actually in the year when we had a planning grant, we conducted with parents a series of questionnaires and interviews to get a sense of what they understood to be going on in their children's classrooms, because at this point they didn't really know that there was a study being implemented. And we used that information to help guide us for the design and development of the rest of the research project. The reality is that not every parent is going to want to be involved. We saw that there were 25%. I'm a glass half full kind of person, so of course I looked at the 75% who did choose to do the home connections. 25% of them didn't. But I think we can't make assumptions about why they didn't. I think what we have to do is work hard to always understand where families are. And the example that I use in my class is when students say, the parents won't be involved. I said, imagine that they live on the main line and that they're not, for instance, in low-income schools. Are our explanations the same? And I think that one of the things we know is that families are experiencing hardships and difficulties across ethnic groups, across socioeconomic levels, and that parenting is hard work. Being a member of a family is hard work. And so people are constantly trying to navigate really rough waters on a regular basis. And while it doesn't solve everything, because there are some folks who may not be doing exactly what we want, but I think you have to persist and make the assumption that the parents really want the best for their children, and use that as your guide. And all I can suggest, and I've suggested before, is to work hard, understanding that the goal is not to show simple success around engaging families, but it really is to engage the child and to make sure that the families are a part, to really the families make a contribution that they want to be a part.
And for us, a really turning point was this anthropological focus. That is, seeing the parent not necessarily as the person who had to do the home connection, but as a broker to the adult resource community of the child, of which we as educators were ignorant of. So we had to basically learn who were the home educators. Home educators could be a Sunday school teacher, it could be a neighbor. It's the people who are nurturing, providing nurturance and support on a regular basis that are sustaining that child. The parents may be working a couple of jobs, but they know who those people are. And changing the role around, instead of putting pressure on them for what they did or did not do, getting them to be the brokers and connectors so that the educators, those classroom educators, will now begin to create a transaction with the home educators who were invisible to them before and not a part of the curriculum. So I think we have to be more creative in engaging the family, not necessarily making each family member do more work, but find what are the support and nurturing community for the children. And I think we've just scratched that surface.
Yeah. I want to give you a quick example of a friend of mine who used to teach here in our law school. And she said to me one day, "What is all this about? My having to show up at the school and worrying every single day about what my child is doing." She said, "I'm okay with the school doing whatever the school is doing. And I don't really want to hear every day that I have something else to do." And of course, it's different than what I would have wanted, but the point is that as a law professor, the assumption was that she was going to want to do that, work with her child. And I said to her, what would it mean if a poor family, a poor mom, said those same words? What would we understand about her experience? And it ended up being a larger conversation. But it really is a matter of, I think, understanding parents where they are. And I just can't really reinforce the idea of not making assumptions. And that's going to have to come from within. It's not going to be something we can legislate. It's not going to be something that a curriculum is going to answer entirely. A curriculum can answer a lot. But through EPIC, we have tried to really think about the ways in which this becomes an incredibly complex issue and see the value in the teachers who really have the task of kind of creating, a culture of success and a culture of the classroom that is engaging and inviting and that says that, we are actually listening to what the parents have to say.
Let me just add one little thing here, because I think at the heart of what you're talking about is that strength-based approach. And if you run into a wall with a family, Stephen Covey says, if you're really going to be effective, you've got to seek first to understand. Assume that you just haven't figured it out. That's the being persistent. And if your view of this family or this parent is primarily negative, and it's around because they don't show up for whatever it is you decided was cute and wonderful, the problem is within. Okay, where's the strength? Where's the nugget of good intentions for that particular family or parent? and build on that. Build on that. You can't find the answer to connecting with that parent or that family from the place you sit. It has to be from the place they sit. And what's the nugget of strength that you can build on? And you have to keep looking, because if you don't find any, you're just following wrong.
And
everybody's got strength.
And I'm just going to underscore, this is where the importance of really good formative assessment is. When we met with the parents, they didn't have time for a lot of nonsense about the picnic and the this and the that. What they wanted to know, my child was at a level 2 cardinality or level 2 alphabetic knowledge. How do I get to a level 3? So let's just keep it simple. How do I get to a level 3? Now, if the educator can't speak in clear language about what is a level 2 and what is a level 3 of that skill, and the parent can't understand it, like Jerry said, we're wasting our time. But if that's clearly understood, you're giving the home educators the knowledge they need practically to do it for their children, which is why they're sitting at the table tolerating your conversation. So I really think we have to be practical. Well, I think we are going to now move to. We have one more question. Yes,
just
our
one
last
more
question, and then we'll move to informal questions.
Thank you. Just one quick question. Listening to Drs. Gaston and John Duplantis, it seems that every member of the panel has sort of mentioned like the culture of success, incorporating sort of partnerships between the home, the school context, different members of the community are working to sort of support the learning of the school children. One concept, however, that I just need a little more information on. I'm very interested in, we can maybe talk in the informal session, this concept of the environment as a third teacher. For me, it resonates with many of the comments that Dr. Duplantis was mentioning about sort of building a culture of success. But I guess sort of this concept of the environment as third teacher, how does that sort of link up with that culture of success? If we could maybe, perhaps as a whole panel, or maybe Dr. Gaston yourself, since you had mentioned it, how does that connect with maybe building a culture of success? Or is there sort of a resonance between that concept mentioned by Dr. Duplantis and sort of this third teacher, if you will, in the environment?
So ask me a question that's not too hard, right? So, I have a colleague in Graduate School of Education, Jerleann, who talks about the second classroom, talking about the home and the community being another place where learning takes place, and considering that a classroom. In much the same way, we think of the environment as a place where we may have less control in a direct way, but a place that clearly teaches children, reinforces the ideas and the skills that are a part of the formal teaching that takes place in the classroom. So when I was a graduate student, there was a lot of emphasis on, graduate student, relevant print, children's understanding of relevant print. And so you have my godchild, who is 2.5, who sees a FedEx truck drive by and says, "Oh, there's FedEx," and everybody says, "Oh, he can read." No, he can't. But he was able, as is true of a low literate adult, figure out the letters, and he had a sense of what those letters were, and he had seen the truck obviously enough times that he knew. Or the kid who sees a stop sign and says stop because he's seen or she's seen that sign many, many times. So we know that there are rich opportunities that exist in the environment, whether it's the written text on a bulletin board, the kinds of interchanges that take place between children and between teacher and children. There are various other media that kids engage that contribute to the ways in which they understand. There's a concept we throw around. There are two concepts we throw around. One is social capital and the other is cultural capital. But it allows us to kind of think more strategically about what that capital is, and then to have it filter in to Louise Moll's knowledge that builds upon, that allows for us to build upon the intersections between the knowledge that kids bring, the knowledge that is shared with them and among them in classrooms, and the knowledge that is a part of their immediate and distal environments.
And just to underscore that.
Something that we learned was,
Here, Jen, you want to step up here?
something that we learned in doing the distributed leadership work was another piece of training was training and development that we gave to the schools. We believed that the schools would start at sometimes with developmental holes, and teacher leaders, you could empower them to be leaders, but if they had no resources from which to lead, then they would be frustrated. So we gave them a bank account of professional development. Annenberg gave them a bank account as part of our commitment to Gail Levin in terms of numbers of hours and so forth. And that bank account was what they could use to address the issues in their setting. They could bring anyone in. We would help them do it. National consultants, local consultants. What I learned from that was that professional development put in the hands of teachers in their own buildings would be not only effective, but would be used in much more powerful ways at times than all of the stuff delivered from the outside. All right, having said that, to transition to the parent piece. When PFT decided to do this work and got a grant to do a distributed leadership plan, they were building a model that included parents on the distributed leadership teams. And they've had some problems with that. But every time I listen to Vivian, I come to believe that this is something that could be done and could be done very effectively, and we wouldn't know how much parents could bring to leadership in a school or in a program, in an early childhood program or in a school until we did it. And I have to believe that there might be a lesson like the lesson I learned in terms of how powerful teachers could be when they were in charge of their own professional development for their colleagues. I believe parents could be equally as powerful.
We're going to just break, underscoring, I think one of the things that you've heard each of the speakers mention across these different sets of ideas is the whole issue of bidirectionality. We really need two-way arrows. When we're talking about the environment, we're talking about the environment isn't static. The educators can make the environment alive and fit the curriculum. That's what we try to do in EPIC, whatever is being read, whatever is being studied, the environment is alive, reflecting that in a dynamic way. And it changes as the children change, as their skills and levels change. We are talking about parents. We're talking about trying to get a dance here. And where it doesn't work is where there is no dance, where there isn't going back and forth. Assessment has to go back and forth. Assessment has to align with curriculum. Curriculum has to actually move the ball in terms of assessment. Professional development cannot happen in isolation. It can't be a one-way arrow. It can't be, as Keats talks about, education is not filling a bucket, it's lighting a fire. We need a connection to light that fire. And we don't have the answers, but we know people who are thoughtfully and systematically struggling with that, and we've been really blessed to have them share their thoughts in these short time periods. So please give a hand to our speakers.